Hi, and welcome to this episode of Rare Book Chat. It's a special episode because we are having a conversation with the world's leading dealer in historic American documents, and we are talking about a document that has not appeared on the market since 1891, and it may just be the most important printed document in American history. I'm Jeremy O'Connor, and I'm here with my co-host,
Michael DiRuggiero.
And
the document we're talking about is a very rare printing of the U.S. Constitution. I mean, extremely rare. And there's an argument to be made that it is the most important printed document of Americana ever to come for sale. And it's coming up for sale this week at Brunk Auctions on October 17th. Bidding is starting at $1 million, but we all expect it to go a lot higher.
In fact, the last time this appeared at auction was in 1891, and as you'll learn in this episode, that same year, a copy of the Declaration of Independence was sold at auction. The prices were very close, and you'll see in the episode which came out higher.
So if you missed your chance in 1891, here's another chance.
We're very excited to introduce our guest for today, Seth Kaller, leading dealer in American historical documents. Hi, Seth.
Hey, guys.
And Seth, why don't you tell us in your own words what it is you do?
I'm a dealer, collection builder, and expert in important American historic documents.
Yeah, I think few major American documents go on the market without going through Seth's hands at some point. Which brings us to today, because this week something very exciting is happening. A copy of the U.S. Constitution is coming up at Brunk Auctions on Thursday, right, Seth? The problem, though, is it should have happened already, but the hurricane intervened.
Well, it was scheduled for September 28th, which is the 237th anniversary of the printing of the document and the signing. But Hurricane Helene really slammed into Asheville. And so it's taken this long to reschedule the auction. It'll be October 17th at 6 p.m. And it's going to be phone and online only because they're still not allowed to have visitors in the gallery.
Will you be in North Carolina for the auction?
I will.
Okay. Tell us what it is that's being auctioned.
Sure. The short answer is the Constitution, but really it's a very rare ratification copy of the Constitution. And, we tend to think just of Philadelphia in the origin story of the document. And yes, that's where the Constitutional Convention was held. That's where it was written. That's where it was signed. And we take up the next day. So it's signed on the 17th. It goes right to John Dunlop's printing office. And the next morning, William Jackson, who was secretary of the convention, gets on the 10 a.m. stagecoach from Philadelphia to New York, relatively new thing, with the engrossed copy of the Constitution, with George Washington's signed cover letters and the signed cover resolution of the convention, and brings it to New York, where Congress was, because the Constitutional Convention didn't report to the states officially. It only reported to Congress, which was in New York. And then what happens when it gets to New York is they read it, they start debating it, and the reason the convention wrote a cover resolution, what it did was suggest a path for ratification. And conveniently, the path did not really involve having Congress decide to support it. They wanted that, but really they said, send it to the states for the people to decide, the people through a semi-democratic process, set up by the states to allow citizens who had the right to vote to vote on it. And what they were really worried about is the possibility of relitigating everything that, they had taken months to come to a compromise on in Philadelphia. So if Congress had actually gotten into a point-by-point debate, nothing would have happened. And so what they did between the 20th and the 28th is debate the Constitution as a whole rather than going into the points. And they couldn't agree to support it. but they did agree unanimously to follow the recommendation and send it to the states for ratification. And what this document does is add that very brief ratification resolution on September 28th and send it off to the states. And besides having the resolution, this particular copy has Charles Thompson's signature as Secretary of Congress. And that makes this one of the official copies. There were 100 printed on September 28th, and Thompson signed them right away. The print had already been in the press, so to speak, because John McLean had printed the Philadelphia version of it a couple days before. So he had that all set, and all they had to do was add the new resolution. So it was on the same day that Thompson was able to sign and start sending out copies to each of the states.
So when they met in New York for the Confederation Congress, did they even have the authority to make any changes?
I suppose, yes, if all 13 states had unanimously agreed on the changes. So, no, it took several conventions and debate to even allow for the Philadelphia Convention or the Federal Convention to take place. It wasn't called the Constitutional Convention because all they were really supposed to do was come up with ideas to improve the Articles of Confederation. And it just took a couple days for them to decide that just wouldn't work. It wasn't fixable.
So just to confirm, so the copy here coming out of New York, the one being offered at Brunk, is the same text as the one sent from Philadelphia to New York, but with this amazing resolution paragraph that you mentioned, which I'd like to read because it's really important. So on September 28th, 1787, as you just mentioned, the Confederation Congress, here's the quote, resolved unanimously that the said report, with the resolutions and letter accompanying the same, be transmitted to the several legislatures in order to be submitted to a convention of delegates chosen in each state by the people thereof, in conformity to the resolves of the convention made and provided in that case. So this printing at Brunk is the first then with that important clause, correct?
Yes. And not exactly poetic, but it gets to the point. And it shows how important also the resolutions are. And in fact, it's interesting that it mentions sending not just the Constitution, but the resolution from the convention that talks about ratification. And then my favorite part, which is the cover letter, so to speak, signed by George Washington, that to me really gets at the essence of the Constitution. And if you're going to just describe the Constitution to anybody, tell people what it does, the best way to do that is just to read the preamble, "We the people," and then skip, and skip to the George Washington signed cover letter that talks about compromise. And he says, you can't preserve liberty without giving up a share of liberty. And he talks about why people in every state are going to be unhappy with parts of it, but how they made sure that every state got the most important thing for that state, and other states had to give up something. And so it's all about compromise. It really...
and that cover letter is, of course, printed in this. I'm looking at it right now in the images.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
The nuances of some of the material in the auction description, the way it's presented, it raises the question of, is this printing, the September 28th printing, the first official printing of the Constitution? And I want to get your thoughts on that.
It is. We call it in the catalog the archetype printing, and the text is not different from what came out of Philadelphia. But again, what came out of Philadelphia really was, it's funny that the newspaper printing on September 19th by Dunlop and Claypool is considered the first public printing. The September 17th, the day it went to the press, but it really wasn't off the press until the morning of the 18th. That was done for the members of the Constitutional Convention and for them to distribute as they saw fit. But it's often not considered publication, made for the public, even though
Right.
we're kind of mincing words and definitions here because it was one step away from being sent out to the public, but with no official calling.
Right.
And so it's really Congress sitting in New York of the Confederation, Articles of Confederation Congress, or they would call it the United States in Congress Assembled. It was their sending it out on September 28th that actually launched the U.S. Constitution into the world, and it's kind of where the proposal meets the people.
Yeah, I mean, in the simplest terms, I'm thinking of the Declaration of Independence as initiating divorce, and the Constitution, as a marriage of document, government and the people, is a more complicated process than just declaring, sort of it's over, goodbye.
Yeah.
Good, so, and what I'm excited about with this document and with the description of the process that accompanies the story of this document, you see the complexities of that marriage of the getting to we the people, and is that the right way to think of this?
First of all, 100% yes to what you just said. But I'll go back a little bit to the Declaration of Independence and the cover letter that John Hancock sent with it to the states. So in the mirror of this, the parallel of this, sending it out to the states, John Hancock, when he sent the cover letter on the broadsides of the Declaration to each of the states, he called it the ground and foundation of a future government. And in fact, another great lot in the sale is Joseph Hughes's copy of the Articles of Confederation, July 12th, 1776 printing.
Wow.
So 8 days later is the first official after independence proposal for what would become a constitution, the Articles of Confederation. But that, took a while to create this government. And, what I love about the Constitution and this government is that, it does so many things differently for the first time. My favorite song in Hamilton, which is King George III, singing, and I won't sing.
Oh, it's a great song. It's a great song. Yeah.
Yeah. I will kill your friends and family to remind you of my love.
Yeah.
And that is so accurate a depiction of the way sovereigns thought of the people and the way governments thought of the people as just an asset, a thing that they could control, that was there for their own benefit. And here it's we, the people of the United States. And even that took some doing. The first printed copy of the Constitution for the convention only was we, the people of the states of New Hampshire, blah, 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 listing all 13. And between then and the second draft printing of the Constitution, you see it change from we, the people of the United States. But also, it's in order to do these things, to form a more perfect union. It's the first government that doesn't, proclaim its perfection. So many before that, made up these stories about being created by God.
Yeah.
The divine right of kings and so forth. And here we are talking about these things that a government is supposed to do for the first time, and the things that they're supposed to do for the people. Provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare. But then it even gets to the other really amazing thing, which is, again, instead of proclaiming perfection, talking about the process of fixing the imperfections, or keeping it appropriate as the world changes. And that's my issue with originalism, is the founders were really looking to the future. And they knew that so much had changed in their lifetimes, and they actually saw that so much would always continue to change, and the answers that we needed to take from this Constitution would be different depending on what the questions are, what the circumstances are. Yet Washington uses that word circumstances and describes how they're different, even at that moment, in different places in the Union. So of course they're going to be different at different times and places. And they create this system for changing it. And that's actually what got it through. And there's a really cool manuscript note on this copy of the Constitution. Somebody in pencil, we don't know if it was done at the time or after, although it's written, the language makes it seem like it's at the time. It says, adopted it must be and shall be. But that's not written right at the top of the Constitution. That's written on Article 5, which is where they talk about amendments.
Wow. Right.
And it was the amendment process, and the idea that there would be amendments in a Bill of Rights that actually allowed it to pass. Because without that, several of the states, including North Carolina, Virginia, New York, would not have ratified the U.S. Constitution.
You know, it's so interesting because what you're describing is how this document contemplates additional political action down the road. And, you know, the story of this document, the story of the activities in New York in, you know, shepherding the document that came out of Philadelphia onto the states for ultimate ratification. Again, you have it. What is emerging is this vision of process, or this picture of process, you know. And I think when you think about, you know, valuable documents and historical documents, the first printing, the Philadelphia printing of the Constitution, it's easy to lose sight of the fact that these documents emerged from very, you know, nuanced negotiations and processes, you know, and that these are fully embedded in a political world. And they're not like they were not designed as trophies for collectors. They were designed,
right.
You know.
That's a good point. Yeah.
The day after the day of the second Sotheby's so-called official edition sale, so I happened to have a copy of the Constitution, you know, with me to show clients. It was a September 20th printing, I think, and I was going to an event that a friend of mine was running that night. He had brought roughly 50 students in from India for an event at the UN that week, talking about their, you know, tech and projects to sort of save the world and at least help their local communities. And, you know, I said, maybe I shouldn't go. I've got this, you know, this big case and a guard and all that. And he's like, no, take it, show it to the kids. So as I'm trying to explain the Constitution to groups of kids from India, students who are obviously much smarter than I am, but have none of the same background, after like the third or fourth little group, it hit me that I have to change my language. And I stopped talking about the Constitution as history and started describing it as technology.
Wow.
Because technology it's not just gadgets. The word means a system of organizing knowledge to solve problems.
Wow. I love that.
And that is what the Constitution is. It creates a system.
When you describe it in those terms, it's really exciting to think about how the document that's selling at Brunk, the ratification printing of the Constitution, really reflects and captures the complexities of going from words on a page printed in Philadelphia with no binding force to becoming law of the land.
And what I like that underscores some of this is the appearance of it. So it has these uneven edges. It's printed off kilter. It's printed hastily for use. As Jeremy said, not a showpiece. This is, you know, we say it's a Constitution, a living document, but you look at this and it brings you to a moment in time where it's actually happening. I love that about how it appears.
Right. Because, you know, there's no podcasting, no internet, no TV, no radio, you know, barely newspapers. 2 magazines in the country, and broadsides or broadsheet printings like this are how the word gets out. And then, you know, it gets to the state, gets to the governor, president of the state. It gets transmitted to the legislature and right to a printer, usually, or right to more than one printers, so that the word further gets out. And it's just, you know, seldom do you see a document, declaration broadsides, you can see this too, but, you know, that the document itself is the story. It's moving history along for us.
A work in progress.
Yeah. And always, so it is kind of a misnomer when we say it's true and not true at the same time. We say and this bunk auction is selling the U.S. Constitution, an original copy of the U.S. Constitution. Well, it is, but it's the Constitution of 1787, which is not quite our Constitution today. Our Constitution today has all of that, but it also has the things that I think the founders certainly they would have expected. 13th Amendment, the end of slavery, much sooner than it happened. Women's voting, I don't know that they could have conceptualized. But they were open to it, and the language is very open to it. And it's just like, I'm saying when in the Declaration, when the other signers agreed to the text of the Declaration and all men are created equal, they weren't delusional. They knew it didn't describe their world,
Right.
but it describes an aspiration.
Yeah.
And, that's what makes these founding documents in this country great, despite all of the flaws. And, that's when I show a declaration or a constitution today, I like to show it with a copy of Martin Luther King's speech for the March on Washington. Because we have to ask, why is it still relevant to us? This document that allowed slavery, this document that gave women no power, because that was the best that could have been had at the time. And it created the path for us and future generations to keep making it a more perfect union. And what MLK's speech does is look back and instead of criticizing it and focusing on the flaws, he says that was a promissory note to which all Americans would ultimately fall heir. So all of the great people in America who moved freedom forward have looked back at that and said, this is what allowed us to move forward.
In light of what we've learned about New York's role in moving the Constitution forward, why were there 500 copies printed in Philadelphia, do you think?
I actually do wonder if 500 really were printed or if that number included other things that they printed. But, that we don't really know. I can tell you, though, there are 14 known copies. I can name probably 15 others that we know used to exist that don't. Like the 2 copies that George Washington sent to Thomas Jefferson. There are now 2 known copies signed by Ben Franklin, one at the American Philosophical Society and the one that I acquired for the Gilder Lehrman collection. But I think he sent out probably 8 or 10 more. And George Washington sent out a number more, and Madison would have sent out copies, and they most of the signers went back to their states with copies. Copies went to different printers. So we don't have a single record of distribution, but when I was working on the last couple of copies of the official edition, we went through the records of anybody we can think of, the papers of Washington, Jefferson, Madison, so forth, so to find evidence that there were more that did exist and were sent out. And, one of the beautiful things about the discovery of this is that maybe it'll make people look again in their attics and basements and see, hopefully something else will be found just because of this story.
That gives us a chance to talk about the provenance. Where has this been all these years?
This has been in one home. And I'll go back a little bit to 1765, which is when Samuel Johnston bought the property that's now known as Hayes Farm. In 1787, Johnston is important because he's the governor of North Carolina, and then between 87 and 89 was head of the 2 North Carolina ratification conventions. And he was also friends with other major political leaders like Joseph Hughes, and there's a great Declaration of Independence connection there, James Wilson and others who actually were, in that house at some time during that period. And that stayed in the same family, Johnson's descendants, until 1865. And then they gave the house to the Wood family, and it stayed in the Wood family until 2022.
Wow.
7 generations.
Wow.
So the first time this property was sold between 1765 and now was 2022.
Wow.
And
Wow.
what happens when, you're moving from a house, you have to go through all the stuff, decide what to take, what to
Oh my
leave. And it was in
God.
that process, they hired an appraiser to look at everything that they were, contemplating leaving or
Putting in a
what to
dumpster.
take. They had to go through
Yeah.
everything. Yeah. And Ken Farmer was the person who actually was thorough enough to go into this storage room outside of the library. And the only thing that you could see in the storage room were a file cabinet under chairs that were piled up, stacked on each other, and an old desk that likely hadn't been entered in decades, that room. And in the file cabinet was a nice little stack of documents that included 2 copies of the Articles of Confederation that were Joseph Hughes's copies, some Samuel Johnston papers, some things that came decades later and were not very important or not important at all, and this copy of the Constitution. And thankfully, Ken Farmer recognized that this could be a valuable document. He knew who Charles Thompson was, saw the signature, and did a little research. And then, as often happens with something of value, but not something that he recognized how valuable it was, it went to Brunk Auctions because they're the great regional auction house in North Carolina, in that whole area. And it was Brunk that did more research and that ultimately, came to my attention.
It sounds like something out of a novel. You can picture that, walking in,
Yeah.
opening the door that hasn't been opened in decades, maybe. Dust.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful scene you
Yeah.
painted there.
I mean, Seth, you've been doing this a long time. You've dealt with some of the most precious documents ever printed. Did you ever think you'd see this? Was this on your radar?
I knew it existed. I had never thought that I would see one be found. And there are a couple items on my sort of dream list that, probably don't exist anymore, but you have to think, well, what if they do? And this, and they might.
And they might.
July 4th, handwritten, signed Declaration of Independence, that kind of thing still could exist. And if it does, it's going to have a story, something like this, I would hope.
Wow, you're right.
It really wasn't, I had done lists of, even when, I was working on the official editions, the Sotheby's auctions, and working on that. I wasn't working with Sotheby's. I was advising clients and frankly, considering buying them. And so I had done lists of other things that it could be compared to. And I just made a brief reference to the official, to the ratification copy, but I really didn't think it was a possibility.
Seth, you mentioned the Sotheby's copy. I'm a little confused now. They describe that as the first official printing of the U.S. Constitution. And we should just give a little background. That sold in November 2021 for $43.2 million, which is a record for a printed document, I should add. But there's there's a story behind that, of course, with the 17,000 bidders having a crowdsourced funding bid and all that sort of thing. And it was really garnered a lot of news attention at the time. But I would love for you to comment that versus this one. They're related, but two different lots entirely.
Well, that is the first printing of the full text of the Constitution. In that sense, it's official. But it was really, in that case, not the printed copy, but the engrossed signed original that went to Congress in New York. That couldn't have happened with the Declaration because the engrossed Declaration didn't exist on July 4th. But the printings were done for the members to distribute on their own and for copies to be sent to New York for New York to distribute. And in fact, that could be a reason why the 500 were printed, if the number really is 500, but that Congress chose not to use that. And that's all speculation, but we do know that what Congress decided to do is to send it out with the ratification resolution. So in that sense, for the purposes of Congress, the old one was no longer suited to purpose.
Yeah, and reflecting on that phrase you just used, you suited to purpose, makes me think of Charles Thompson and his role here as Secretary of the Congress, moving this along the path of history. His signature is absolutely essential. Without it, it's not, it's not just that it's a nice enhancement, like you have a signed first edition, like an inscribed copy here, like it's just a completely different story.
Yeah. In fact, signature. So I consigned one lot to the sale just because of that. There's lot 1505 is the printing of the Act of Congress laying out the duties of the Secretary of Congress. And in it, it describes how the Secretary has to sign and send copies of every Act of Congress to each state. So I thought, that's an important part of the story that explains why it's Thompson who's signing the Constitution. So that's in the auction too. Yeah. I mean, he was such an important guy. He sometimes gets short shrift because despite being one of only two guys to sign the Declaration on July 4th, he wasn't actually asked to sign it when the engrossed copy was done. And the reason is the mirror of what's here. So normally, it's the Secretary of Congress or the clerk who takes the vote, counts the vote, and certifies that was the vote. But nobody signs it other than the clerk or the secretary. And so here, he's signing on behalf of everyone.
Yeah, it's kind of the imprimatur.
Signing, say that again, a signing on behalf of everyone. That is so powerful.
And we're so focused on presidents, and even the presidents, of the United States in some form or of Congress before George Washington, president of the United States of America. Charles Thompson was never president, but in the whole period of the Continental Congress and then the Articles of Confederation Congress, he was the secretary. And if you think about a government where there's he's the whole executive government, and Congress, when it leaves town, and it's not a phone call away when it leaves town. The whole government is in his hands. He's like the prime minister of the United States.
Wow.
So here he's just doing something in a secretarial fashion, but he's really a key figure in the functioning, not the theory of, but just the very functioning of the government that heralded it from the first protest against taxation to a real Congress, to independence, to this nascent government of the Articles that didn't work through to the Constitution.
Yeah. Right, so he's a through line, just to underscore what you just said, from the Continental Congress during the war. He stays as the secretary through all this time. Let's take a deep breath here. This is really exciting. I mean, there's just no question about it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of, we're putting the background to it, but just on a gut level,
this is unusual in that the starting bid is $1 million. There's no reserve above that. That bid is met.
And the no reserve caught my attention too.
Perfect world, it should be worth more than the so-called official edition because of the rarity, the importance, the actual part that this played in the process of moving towards ratification. But lightning really struck in that 2021 sale.
Yeah.
That's the thing. I know that price seems there's a lot of context for it.
Well, I want to actually, before we talk about money, I want to ask the question of, in this description, the Brunk description, in the words of James Madison, the Constitution, quote, was nothing more than the draft of a plan, nothing but a dead letter until life and validity were breathed into it by the voice of the people speaking through the several state conventions. So in light of that quote, Madison is reminding us it had to go through this process. The people have to say yes. What copy would he want? What copy would James Madison want? Would he want the Philadelphia printing, or would he want the ratification print?
He'd want both. But I think he would consider this one to be the archetype, is the word we use, the important official copy. And sometimes you think, well, when is something born? The U.S. Constitution was born with this going out to ratification or with ratification, but nothing is ever born without something being there before the birth. And so that's the official edition in Philadelphia.
Going back to the Madison quote, though, that the Constitution that emerged, the document that came out of Philadelphia, nothing more than the draft of a plan. I mean, it's entirely possible that what happened in New York in September of 1787 could have either led to the whole process breaking down, or going back to negotiating between the states. I mean, am I right in saying that?
I think if it got bogged down in Congress, it never would have happened.
It was a high stakes moment. I mean, it was not just
so many high stakes moments, so many compromises.
Do you think Thompson, when he signed this, had a feeling of, okay, sigh of relief, we're moving forward?
Sigh of relief that we've gotten past this blockade. I think he probably wasn't sure that it would still happen, but he, as much as anybody else, knew how necessary it was, because he had been through resolution after resolution. Hey, we need to make this change, and changes in the articles had to be unanimous. That wasn't working. Negotiations with Britain, with France, with other powers, we had 13 states, each having their own representatives, or many having their own representatives alongside the federal government. You had, states with very contrasting interests in certain fields, and so you never could get them to agree. And Thompson was the guy getting the brunt of that, because he had to help make resolutions of Congress be executed, and they weren't executable. He had to try to come up with a funding approach, and all of the attempts to do that had fallen apart. What the Constitution does is it brings all these issues together, so that it's a system where one state has to give up something that it really doesn't want to give up, because there's something else more important that they need that other state to give up that they don't want to give up. And so Thompson, sitting right there, knew that we needed it. I don't know that anybody felt confident that it was actually going to be ratified.
All right, so let's play the game. Like it's three objects are on the table.
Ooh, I love games.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Let's imagine a large conference table, and on that conference table.
Wait, what's the conference table made of?
Doesn't matter.
Mahogany. I'm picturing a mahogany conference table. Yeah.
Not pine.
Not pine. This deserves mahogany.
Seth, you okay with the mahogany?
I'm okay.
All right. So on this mahogany table, this large conference table, we have 3 documents. The first printing of the Declaration of Independence.
The Dunlop broadside. Great.
Right. The first printing of the Constitution of the United States. The Ken Griffin $43 million.
Yeah, the first printing of the final text.
The one sent from Philadelphia to New York.
Yeah.
Right. And then the lot that's coming up at Brunk, the first ratification printing of the Constitution. So here's the game. You get to choose one, and you own it, but you can never resell it. It's not a question of monetary value. It's a question of what is the most important to you. Which one do you want?
You get it for free, too.
You get it for free. But
if only.
You guys are generous.
Yeah. Well, it's a good game, The only thing...
Pure collecting desire.
Right. So, Seth, you are the expert in this field. So you have to go first.
For me, it's easy. The ratification copy of the Constitution. Because it's the thing that I'd have the most fun showing people, talking about.
Huh.
And it's got that personal connection. Charles Thompson, I can see him in the room signing it and then sending it out for ratification. And without that, and it's easier to display than the other Constitution printing. And the Declaration is cool, but the Dunlop.
Oh, it's cool.
Yeah,
Cool, right?
but you have another challenge when you're showing that, because people don't understand that that's the Declaration more than the national treasure, in gross copy that was actually created as a souvenir in August, but not on the spot, July 4th, 1776.
Because it doesn't have the signatures at the bottom.
Yep.
Do we just get this right? That Seth Kaller is leaving a Declaration of the Independence on this mahogany table, the first printing of the Declaration of Independence, and a first printing of the Constitution, an example of which sold for $43 million not too long ago, and is walking away with the ratification printing. Is that correct?
Yes. Yep.
That's what I heard.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow. Michael, what do you think of that?
I think I don't know. Well, all right. So if I go next, I'm trying not to be led by Seth because I did make my decision before he answered.
No, I got to ask you, what do you think of the fact that Seth Kaller just left the Declaration of Independence?
Well, I mean, somebody else can grab it now. Aha.
Okay.
So that's our benefit.
Okay.
But we're going to be fighting over that ratification copy because that's the one I want too.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
I'll tell you why. Because the Declaration of Independence is obviously amazing, and it would win head to head among just about anything else. But what I like about the Constitution is it's less U.S. centric. Like the Constitution is a philosophical political work that becomes a bedrock for other political systems worldwide. So that, and I feel more comfortable when you're collecting kind of important documents in the world, as opposed to 1776 colonies. But the reason I want the ratification one also versus the one taken from Philadelphia to New York is the officialness of it. The ratification clause means a lot to me. This is the one that started the road officially to becoming the Constitution, and that that I can't get out of my head. Jeremy, your turn.
You guys just went for the ratification printing, so I guess that leaves the other two for me.
Just one. Just one.
I am persuaded. I am persuaded that this is the most exciting of the three. But somebody's got to look after that Declaration.
Yeah.
And I'm taking the Declaration of Independence, and
Seth and I are fighting over it.
Yeah,
you're just walking away with it.
Yeah, I'm taking the Declaration of Independence. I mean, just on the thought that if you're a book dealer and you walk away with a Declaration of Independence at some point in your career, you're not going to have too many regrets. So
it's a good day.
Yeah, I'm happy with that. But
that actually, that's another reason for my vote, because I've had it on the broadside, and I've had an official edition of the Constitution, but I've never had the ratification copy before. I don't think my vote would have changed even if that wasn't the case, but that is the case. So,
well, that's a pretty cool thing to be able to say.
Yeah, and now we have to see. Like, for years, the Declaration is what I get the most calls on, people who think that they have one. And that the official edition sale didn't really change the calculus. I didn't get more calls from people who thought they had a Constitution. But I wonder if that'll change, or if, like the most fun thing could be in 5 years to get back together and say, okay, because of this sale, what came out of the woodwork?
Oh, that would be fascinating and wonderful.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And possible.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not probable. Possible.
It's an interesting thought experiment, because I'm wondering, and as we were preparing for this conversation and I was looking ahead to it, I was thinking, what would it be like if this printing of the Constitution was in the same sale as the Philadelphia printing, like a head to head on the same day? And I wonder how how you would feel about the Philadelphia printing in that context.
That is, that's a problem I'd love to have.
Right? High quality problem. Yeah. Yeah.
You'd be forcing people to choose on the spot, though.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's probably not a great thing for the price of either of them.
I'm not sure.
I am aware of an auction record from 1891 for a first printing of the Declaration of Independence. And I also saw in the catalog description for this that there's a record from 1891, but I don't know
Yeah.
if those are the same sales. Do you know anything about that?
Ratification copy of the Constitution signed by Thompson, sold at C.F. Lilly in January of 1891 for $400. And now that you're mentioning it, and I hadn't actually looked down my list of Dunlop Declaration sales until you just mentioned it. But yes, in December of 1891, so same year, a broadside, not the same sale. This one was Stan Hankel's and Thomas Birch, and a Dunlop Declaration described as clean as the day of issue, sold for $325. So, yeah, the Constitution was more valued than the Dunlop Declaration.
Whoa. So less.
Exactly.
So you guys made the right pick.
That's one data point of the head-to-head.
It is fascinating, though, to think that they appeared in the same year, and we kind of have a read of. I mean, it doesn't tell us much about today, but 130 years ago, the market was looking at these, saying, let's take the Constitution, the ratification printing over the.
Exactly. But if you miss the Dunlop Declaration, and this is the first chance since 1891 on this Constitution, but on the Dunlop Declaration, if you miss that, you'd have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, roughly 10 other chances, maybe more, on Dunlop's. So, yeah. And I still think that I'll have another chance at a Dunlop Declaration someday. And I doubt that I'll have a chance at another one of these constitutions. And I'm not talking about, one that's on the market or known in private hands now, but based on the number printed, the fact that some could be discovered somewhere, just chances are.
Right.
Seth, this was wonderful. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you so much, Seth. I learned a lot. See you again.